delegates have gathered this week to debate the final details of a proposed constitution, enabling legislation, and a plan for union. And if they can reach an agreement, which is then ratified by their respective annual conferences, then 2 years from now, in Dallas, Texas, another conference is planned to officially give birth to a new church. But that historic result is far from certain. Even after a decade of gestation and the preparation of 17 working committees, the final stages of labor have brought some strain and complications, and the discussions inside the ballrooms have become intense, and attitudes...
Chicago, November 10th, 1966. You are there. Onward to Union. We ask you to imagine that our microphone is at this famous event. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. You are there. The following is a special production of the Commission of Archives and History of the Wisconsin Conference of the United Methodist Church. It is based on authentic historic facts and quotations. And now, Chicago, November 10th, 1966, at John Davies.
Okay, I'm inside the Conrad Hilton now, and I'm making my way toward the Continental and the International ballrooms. Some listeners may remember that back in 1962, the ballrooms were constructed as part of a large and very expensive expansion program. As I walk these corridors, it's clear to me that little expense was spared. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more lavish and richly appointed space in all of Chicago. I understand that in one ballroom, there are over 400 Evangelical United Brethren delegates, while the ballroom across the hallway contains over 800 Methodists. Between these two chandelier-lit ballrooms is a 20-foot corridor, and I've been told that for the last 2.5 days, proposals and counter-proposals have been shuttled back and forth as they move toward a document for union that both bodies can accept. Okay. Now I've reached the plush carpet outside the ballrooms, and what I'm hoping to find is a delegate, perhaps in need of a short break, who would be willing to fill us in on how the debates are going and whether the dream of a union is likely to be realized. For now, the hallway seems entirely empty. Oh, wait, I see two women who appear to be deep in conversation down at the far end. It's a long shot, but let me make my way and see if they can be of help. Madams? Madams? Excuse me. I am John Davies from CBS Radio, and I'm wondering if you can help our listening audience. Are you in any way connected to the events going on inside these ballrooms? Perhaps maybe your husband is a delegate? Have you any news on how the debates are going?
Sorry, sir. What were you asking? Is my husband a delegate? Well, hardly. Look at my bag. I am the delegate in my family, as is my friend here, Mrs. Frances Hundlets.
Oh. But really? I do see the badge, but I wasn't aware that women were fully included in this level of leadership within the church.
I never. Doesn't he have the nerve, Francis? Well, sir, I can tell you that we two are certainly not here to serve bars and cookies. What was your name again? Oh, Mr. Davies? Well, Mr. Davies, let me be the first to inform you that while we women may be just a sprinkling of delegates, Francis and I are proud to represent our denominations. Right, Francis?
What? I'm so sorry, madam. my sincere apologies to both of you. Please, let me start over. If you could, kindly tell our listeners your names and where you're from and...
Yes, certainly, Mr. Davies. My name is Mrs. Luella Rilling from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My home church is First EUB in Milwaukee, but here at this conference, I am gratified to be a delegate representing the Wisconsin Conference of the Evangelical United Brethren Church.
And you, madam?
Yes. Well, sir, my name is Mrs. Frances Hundley, and I am from Mequon, Wisconsin, northwest of Milwaukee. Like Luella, I am a delegate to this general conference as well. But I represent the East Wisconsin Conference of the Methodist Church.
Interesting. So you two are on opposite sides of the fence, so to speak, or at least in opposite sides of the hallway.
That's not quite the way I'd characterize it, Mr. Davies. Look, currently I am president of our conference Women's Society of Christian Service, and Luella here, why, she is a past president of her conference's Women's Society of World Service. You served for 5 years as a president, didn't you?
I did.
And as for offense, if one does exist between our two women's groups, well, it's not tall enough to care about.
So you know each other?
Of course. In fact, Frances and I are old friends. Hard not to be, given the cooperation and shared mission between our two groups. And not to mention, Frances and I were delegates to our denomination's previous general conferences. So you see, it's even more special to be at this historic conference. I feel we have a unique perspective. Don't you, Frances?
So tell me then, why are you two ladies outside in the hallway and you're not there listening to the debates with the other, mostly male delegates?
Well, Mr. Davies, to be honest, the topic they are bogged down with currently is not of much concern to Luella and I. Frankly, most of the big issues around our union have already been settled, at least as much as they can be.
Yes, settled mostly by the EUB Church compromising, I might add.
Luella.
Really? And can you tell our listeners why that might be?
Well, Mr. Davies, to understand, you and your listeners will need a bit of a history lesson. To begin with, the Evangelical United Brethren Church is a relatively young church, only 20 years old this year. It was born in Johnstown, Pennsylvania in 1946 with the union of the Evangelical and the United Brethren in Christ churches.
Another union? And were you a delegate from Wisconsin to that uniting conference as well?
Oh, good gracious, no! Not in 1946! But Mr. Davies, you know who was. Miss Irene Halmerson of Racine, Wisconsin. I might add, she was one of only 2 evangelical women delegates from across the nation seated at that conference. And it was the first time in history that women delegates were included at any evangelical general conference at all. Of course, she would have been present for the uniting conference that immediately followed. Frances, did you hear that Irene is now the historian for the Women's Society for World Service in Wisconsin?
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Perfect for her.
Yeah.
But Luella, don't forget the other half of that union, the United Brethren. Mr. Davies, while there were any United Brethren women elected from Wisconsin to that 1946 General Conference, United Brethren women from Wisconsin were delegates to their general conferences going way back, right?
That's true, Francis, that's true. Mr. Davies, I am sure most of your listeners have no idea, but the United Brethren were quite a bit ahead of their time when it came to allowing women to play a serious role in the church. Way back in 1889, the men of the UB Church voted to have women not only serve as lay delegates to their general conference, but also to grant them full clergy rights, if you believe it.
Ordained women pastors? That's remarkable. And in Wisconsin?
Oh, yes, there were quite a few. Just in the 19th century, there were Ida Richards Marquardt, Mary Whitney, Miss Atlanta J. Cox.
Oh, well, that is something. And there were women delegates to General Conference in Wisconsin as well?
Oh, well, I happen to know this one. Mr. Davies, between 1905 and 1933, 4 Wisconsin women served as United Brethren General Conference delegates: Selena Richards, Grace Whitney, Edna Proctor, and Minnie Mosher.
Amazing. I had no idea. But that brings us a tricky question. It would seem that in 1946, when the EUB Union took place, there must have been United Brethren women pastors in Wisconsin. And even I know that the evangelical church didn't allow for women pastors. So what happened there?
Well, that's the thing of unions, isn't it, Mr. Davies? Compromises and accommodations have to be made. As I've been told, because I wasn't there, in 1946 there were 3 Wisconsin women UB elders. The Reverends Lulu Hines, Sarah Maurer, and May Richardson. Plus another 6 or 7 locally ordained preachers.
And were they pushed out of the pulpit and just asked to leave this new church?
Hardly, Mr. Davies.
No, nothing as reactionary as that, Mr. Davies. At least not here in Wisconsin. Right, Luella?
Not at all, not at all. They were all brought into the new EUB church in Wisconsin and allowed to continue their ministries. It was just that no further women were to be ordained, at least not here. But you might be interested to know that the Reverends Maurer and Richardson became something of celebrities within the new Wisconsin EUB conference. So many churches wanted them as guest preachers, as singing evangelists, something of a novelty, you see.
So here we are, 20 years later, with another union. What are the compromises and accommodations that are being made in these 2 ballrooms to make that happen?
Oh, quite a lot, I'm afraid. Especially for Mrs. Rilling and other UB delegates.
Such as?
Oh, goodness, where to start? Well, just to begin, in the EUB, bishops are re-elected every 4 years, but Methodist bishops are elected for life. The Methodist way prevailed here. Luella?
Yes, well, that was a tough one to swallow. But I think an even bigger lump in our collective throats is how district superintendents are to be selected. In our church, they are elected by their annual conferences, their peers. But Methodists let their bishops appoint them.
And the Methodists prevailed here again. It's a little embarrassing. But truth be told, Mr. Davies, we Methodists have given up almost nothing on any of the issues, big or little.
Oh, Francis, we haven't even talked about your central jurisdiction. That's got to be the thorniest issue of the lot. And I might add, that's a problem of the Methodists' own making.
Central jurisdiction? What's that?
Oh dear. How to explain, Mr. Davies? Well, the central jurisdiction is a legacy given to us as Methodists by slavery and the Civil War. The war split the nation, and likewise it split the church into 2 churches, Northern and Southern Methodists.
And we all know that breaking things is a whole lot easier than putting them back together.
Indeed, Luella. To make a very long story short, after decades of negotiations, the two Methodist churches got back together in 1939.
Although compromises and accommodations had to be made, right, Frances?
Quite a few, in fact. But the big one was that the Northern Methodists had to agree that the Southern Methodists wouldn't have to change their views on race.
Sorry?
Mr. Davies, this was the situation. In 1939, Southern white Methodists wanted it clear that any black Methodist congregation in their midst wasn't to be included in their annual conferences. They wanted all black congregations placed into a separate annual conference, and all those annual conferences placed in one jurisdiction, a race-based jurisdiction, the central jurisdiction. Mr. Davies, it was unthinkable that a white congregation would ever be served by a black pastor, but this way there wasn't even a chance that white Southern Methodists would be required to sit at a table with a black Methodist as an equal. It was all that simple.
I don't think I really understand what jurisdictions are.
Oh, Mr. Davies, that was all a Southern Methodist idea as well. In 1939, they insisted on forming these geographical jurisdictions to group annual conferences regionally, except, of course, for the race-based central jurisdiction. The point of geographical jurisdiction was to dilute the power of the General Conference.
You see, Mr. Davies, there was a lot of mistrust of Northern Methodists and their ways. So if regional jurisdictions could elect their own bishops and make some of their own rules, well, then Southern Methodists could be sure that they'd elect their own homebred bishops. They could run their own shop, so to speak.
And so here we are in 1966 with essentially a segregated Methodist church. I know my fellow EUB delegates aren't excited about regional jurisdictions in general, but the central jurisdiction, that is just not tolerable.
So what's going to happen?
Oh, the central jurisdiction will go away. That ball started down that hill back at our General Conference of 1956. It's just a matter of when.
Not too soon for me, Frances.
Or me either, Luella. But frankly, many of our Southern Methodist delegates are afraid. Too much change, too fast for their congregations. At least that's what they contend. Anyway, another compromise had to be made.
And yet another accommodation, Mr. Davies. If you can believe it, after nearly a whole day of going back and forth between the ballrooms, the Southern Methodists managed to avoid not only the immediate elimination of the central jurisdiction, but even the setting of a firm date for its demise.
We had to settle for a target date of 1972. Well, we shall see.
Well, ladies, I can see the delegates of your two general conferences have had to deal with a lot of tough issues over the last several days. And I imagine there's more being dealt with right now. Do you have any idea of what point of contention you're missing by talking to me and to my listeners right now?
Mr. Davies, you wouldn't believe it. Talk about ludicrous.
No offense, Mr. Davies, but sometimes I just don't understand people. Here we are in the process of joining two churches together with all their complex structures and programs and traditions.
With the goal of ordering our corporate Christian life to better facilitate translation of our faith into action.
And what are they haggling about?
The name!
The name? You mean the name for the new church? But certainly that's been decided on, no?
Well, when the dust settles, I'm pretty sure it's to be the United Methodist Church. But who knows? Frances, you must tell Mr. Davies what happened at the Methodist General Conference 2 years ago in 1964. You were there. That was Pittsburgh, right?
Oh dear. No, Luella, you know how I feel about this whole squabble. Raising a fuss about the name for our new church, it's embarrassing.
I'm sorry, Francis, but really, this is one of the few areas where the Methodists have been accommodating to the EUB's view. It's a story worth telling.
Mrs. Hunley, please.
Oh, okay. I'll have to take you and your listeners back 2 years. We'll have to take your microphone to 1964 and the Methodist General Conference in Pittsburgh. Imagine we are at the newly built Pittsburgh Civic Arena. Your listeners will no doubt know it as the first such arena built with a retractable roof. A lot of Pittsburgh steel went into its making. Anyway, it was a Thursday, and we Methodists had been debating the working document for union for 2 days. The head of our Uniting Commission, a Mr. Charles Parlin, had been presenting the document section by section. The point being, we were to give the commission our input and our blessing so they could continue their work. Anyway, as I remember it, Bishop Harmon was in the chair when he recognized Carl Lug from the Louisiana Conference. Let's imagine, Mr. Davies, that your microphone is there. This is what your listeners would have heard.
Bishop Harmon, I would like to amend the recommendation of the committee as it relates to the name.
State how you wish it changed.
I move, sir, that we express the desire of the conference as being of retaining the name the Methodist Church.
Motion has been made and seconded that we do retain in this document, which is to be perfected, I assume, the name, the Methodist Church.
In support, may I say that while I am in favor of union with our Evangelical United Brethren, I am opposed to adding or taking away from the name the Methodist Church. The Methodist Church is, in its traditions, a world-minded church. We are known throughout the world as a church. I don't think we would add anything to the strength and appeal and majesty of our name by adding the word united. In my opinion, to make any addition to the name of the Methodist Church would be to take away from the appeal, the simplicity that our name possesses. I trust the conference will support this amendment to the recommendation.
I recognize Mr. Saltman from the Pacific Northwest Conference.
I would like to speak against the amendment. I don't think the Commission has brought the proposed change of name to us out of the desire to improve the name of our denomination. This would be entirely out of order, but rather it is brought to us as a part of the whole concept of merger.
Hi, Bishop.
I speak as a former member of the Evangelical Church, now part of the Evangelical United Brethren Church. So it is not too difficult for me to understand the immense adjustment in the thinking of the Evangelical United Brethren people to come to the point of endorsement of the instrument before us for the merger of our denominations. That is, the psychological adjustment of coming into a church 10 or 15 times the size of their denomination. It therefore seems highly appropriate to me that in the alteration of our name, that we express the ideas that it is a merger of two denominations, not an assimilation of the Evangelical United Brethren Church into the Methodist. This is an extremely important point, Bishop. We should be very grateful that our two commissions have brought to us a name which has such an excellent implication in these days. I hope we can sustain the new name of the church that is proposed.
I would again recognize Mr. Carl Lug.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose this last speech and support the amendment for the deletion of the word united. We have heard this union referred to a good many times as a marriage. I hope it will be a marriage, a long one, a permanent one, a very happy one. But I know, in this country at least, when Miss Brown marries Mr. Jones, they do not become Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I think this custom should be retained. Now, around the world, there are 80 denominations outside our own using the word Methodist. And some have proposed, given that fact, that retaining the name the Methodist Church would be uncomfortably bumptious and an affront to the other Methodist denominations of the world. I would like to raise the question of whether or not it is not uncomfortably bumptious and an affront to call us the United Methodist Church when just two of the branches get together.
I, Bishop Harmon, again recognize Mr. Saltman.
In answer to what has just been said, and particularly the reference in the last moment of the speech, I would like to call attention to the fact that the proposal of the name, the United Methodist Church, is in fact accurate. The Evangelical United Brethren Church is the result of several unions. We here in this General Conference are the result of several unions. What could be more appropriate than to retain the historic name Methodist, but at the same time indicate that we are moving and have been moving for 2 generations to ecumenicity, even in our own household.
The question has been called.
Point of order!
Mr. Lug.
My question is this. Is this action final and definitive? A position from which we cannot possibly change? Or is it merely a recommendation?
Mr. Lug, I'm going to let Mr. Parlin, chair of our Committee on Union, speak on this.
This is a good question. The votes we are proposing now are not definitive, but are indicative of what this General Conference thinks they should give by way of guidance to the Commission. Let me put an extreme case. Suppose by a vote of 90%, we would indicate that we wanted either to retain the old name or accept a new name. Under the terms of reference, which we have, it would still be open to the Commission to choose either name by the time it is brought to the special session in 1966. However, if the vote were 90%, I would think what would happen, I wouldn't think that's what would happen. We are just asking for guidance. Now, just by way of explanation, the matter of name caused as much debate, perhaps, as any other item. We went around and around it, and at one of our very first meetings, Bishop Clare brought a cartoon from the New Yorker magazine, where a great fish with jaws extended were bearing down on a boat. The name of the cartoon was Merger. We decided that this is not what we were talking about. We were talking about the union between 2 churches with long and honorable histories. The commissions were divided right down the middle on which name they wanted, the United Methodist Church or the Methodist Church. I think if we could have had it, we'd have come to the agreement on the Methodist Evangelical Church, and that would have validated all our cornerstones which say any church.
You would have to put South on some of those.
However, there's a group in Texas calling themselves the Evangelical Methodist Church, a very cantankerous group. And if we tried to take this name, we would be in court for years to find out what our name was. We abandoned it. I am quite sure that the majority of the Evangelical United Brethren Commission would prefer to use the name the United Methodist Church because it would help in the annual conferences when it comes to persuading their people that this is a real union of churches and not the semblance of this cartoon which I just described. However, I am assured by our evangelical brethren, who are the most gracious people with whom I have ever negotiated with in any field whatsoever, that if it is the overwhelming feeling of our General Conference that we would prefer to retain the name the Methodist Church, they are quite confident they would be able to persuade their annual conferences to go along, if that is our overwhelming desire.
The question is on the amendment offered by the brother from Louisiana, Mr. Louie. but we asked for, I'm not sure how he worded it, but that we retain the name of the Methodist Church instead of the United Methodist Church. Have I stated that correctly? Are you ready to adopt the amendment? If so, lift your hands. Those opposed? It is adopted. Fascinating, Mrs. Hundley. Thanks for taking us back to 1964 and Pittsburgh for that interesting bit of background. But what was the count? Surely it wasn't 90% for retaining the name the Methodist Church.
Well, Mr. Davies, when I raised my hand in opposition to the name change, I could only see a sprinkling of like-minded votes. Afterwards, some claimed the vote was 90% to remain the Methodist Church. Perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, but it was definitely overwhelming.
And there you have it, Mr. Davies. I'm sorry, Francis, but it seems to me that the 1964 name vote wasn't the best example of Christian charity.
I won't argue with that, Luella. But the funny thing is, Mr. Davies, is that when Mr. Parlin brought the General Conference's desire to retain the name the Methodist Church back to the Commission, they apparently decided to ignore the request. The name, the United Methodist Church, remained.
Come, Francis, that's not exactly true.
How so, Mrs. Brillig?
Well, in a quite obvious attempt to placate those delegates attached to the name, the Methodist Church, the Commission added a sentence to the proposed constitution for the new church.
Luella is right, Mr. Davies. Another compromise, I suppose. The sentence said that the name, the United Methodist Church, would only have to be used on legal documents. Elsewhere, the shorter name, the Methodist Church, could be used. And that was the proposal they brought to those conferences.
Sorry, but doesn't that just give permission for any current Methodist church to continue on as they were? Like the union never happened. What about the creation of a new church? I mean, they wouldn't even have to change their stationery.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Thank you. I believe you understand perfectly the issue as we EUBs see it. Let me tell you, this was of no little concern to the delegates in my ballroom. I mean, really. But, thank goodness, after we raised the point, the Methodist delegates came to their senses, at least most of them. Francis, tell Mr. Davies how it happened.
Well, Mr. Davies, really, in the end, it was a small matter. This happened just before Luella and I stepped outside here in the hallway. You'll have to take your microphone back several minutes and your listeners into the Methodist ballroom. Mr. Parlin, chair of our committee for union, was leading us through the items in the Constitution, and he got to item number 2, the name. First, he dealt with the inserted sentence. Mr. Davies, if your microphone had been there, this is what your listeners would have heard.
Okay. Please turn to page 7 of the Brown documents, paragraph 2, the name. The section now reads, the name of the church shall be the United Methodist Church. In other than legal documents, the name the Methodist Church may be used. Now, we are asked by the EUBs if we are willing to delete that second sentence. In other than legal documents, the name the Methodist Church may be used. Your commissioners wish, and I believe the vote was unanimous, to recommend that we accede to this request. This is a de facto situation anyhow. Everybody, including all the EUB commissioners, realize that we are, maybe our name is the United Methodist Church, but we are going to be known as Methodists. Just like the Presbyterians are Presbyterians, even though technically they are United Presbyterians. Now, this does not mean that we have to change the name of our organizations. For example,
If it is the wisdom of the Board of Publications to keep the Methodist Publishing House, I see no possible objection to them doing exactly that. For example, the Evangelical United Brethren Church calls their publishing house the Audubon Press. There's nothing here that would prevent us from being the United Methodist Church and calling our press the Nashville Press or anything else. I think that we all agree that the sentence is unnecessary, and if it helps the EUBs, we thought it would be a nice gesture to remove the sentence. So I bring you the recommendation that we accede to the EUB request and eliminate the second sentence of that paragraph.
And so, Mr. Davies, the motion carried.
Well, I refuse to be as defeatist as Mr. Carlin. I am sure that future generations will appreciate the importance of the united name for the new church.
I am sure you are right, Luella. Anyway, I thought to myself, it seems a lot of minds have changed since 1964. Surely we were out of the woods, at least as far as being united goes. But I was wrong, Mr. Davies. Don't turn your microphone off just yet. Mr. Carl Lug, you remember him from 2 years ago? Well, he wasn't done, and he just had to put his finger back into the pot. So you'll want to take your microphone and listeners back into the ballroom. Mr. Carlin probably thought the path was clear as well. As he then continued,
Bishop Inslee, your committee brings to you on a vote of 13-0 that we accept the United Methodist Church as our new name. I'm not going to go back over the arguments. I think it was very well expounded on by Bishop Wick yesterday. The commission had 4 petitions dealing with this name. 2 said, fine, that's the right name, let's go with it. 1 preferred the name the Methodist Evangelical Church. The other preferred the name the United Brethren Church. Your committee was unanimous in recommending that we stay with the United Methodist Church.
Motion now is 1 to concur with the text of Article 2 of Division 1. As many as will vote concurrence will lift their hand.
Carl F. Lug of the Louisiana Annual Conference. I would like to offer a substitute motion for the matter just presented, dealing with the name of the Methodist Church.
All right, what?
I move we retain the name of the Methodist Church in the proposed new church.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we retain the name the Methodist Church. Do you care to speak, sir?
Yes. Mr. Chairman and brethren, it was my privilege at the last session of our General Conference in 1964 to make a motion that we retain the name the Methodist Church in the new proposed church. This motion was received with an enthusiastic response. A conservative estimate would be that 90% of those voting approved it. This action of the General Conference was laid aside later by an ad hoc committee on the basis that the name the Methodist Church would not be legally available in some countries, and the committee listed 3 where this would be true: Canada, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. However, during the interim period, the EUB Church in Canada has gone on record, according to the religious news services, as not wanting to unite with the Methodist Church of the U.S. anyway. With only Nigeria and Sierra Leone left facing difficulty at this point, it seems to me there should be some way available for legal relief at this point insofar as these countries are concerned. I think the problem at this point is small when compared to the problem that will be created in the U.S. where the bulk of our membership resides if we fail to retain the name the Methodist Church. For instance, if we add the word united to our present name, I think that we will consign the new church to the limbo of anonymity. That is, we shall become known by our initials and not by our name. Since unification in 1939, we have been known as the Methodist Church. We have enjoyed the distinction of being known by our name, as are many other large denominations. Prior to 1939, we were known as MPs, the ME Church and the ME Church South. I think it's common knowledge that both the religious and secular press abhors long names. The press tends to designate the names of various institutions by their initials. It is therefore reasonable to assume at the moment that the second we add the word United to our present name, we shall be known as the UMC. Furthermore, the suggested name, the United Methodist Church, is a misnomer. There are several branches of the Methodist Church which are not yet a part of the organic whole, and to proclaim the proposed new church as the United Methodist Church is misleading. And in adding the name United at the insistence of some as a kind of protection against the absorption of the smaller denomination, are we not really indicating a basic feeling of distrust? That is, if we are really in sympathy with one another to unite, do we need to change the name? And if we're not really ready for union on the basis of the present instrument, would the change really accomplish or mean anything? It is my strong conviction that to add just one word is to lessen the appeal and magnetism found in the very simplicity of our name, the Methodist Church. I would state in closing that I am heartily in favor of the union with the EUBs, and I am fully committed to such a union. And it is because I want to see an effective, strengthening, and renewing union eventually consummated that I raise several specific objections to the present plan of union, and the changing of our name is one of them. We have a fine name. We have a great name. Let's keep it.
Now, the motion before the House is to retain the Methodist Church as the name for the new church. Is there anyone who's against this restoration?
Information, Bishop.
All right. Melville Harris of the Libertarian Conference. What is your inquiry?
I wonder if the bishop would comment on the significance of the issue of the name as it relates to the EUBs. And then I want to make a statement after I hear you say a word on it, if I may.
Mr. Harris, as I understand the situation, this change of name was not requested by our EUB friends, our Evangelical United Brethren friends. This was proposed to the commissars by one of our own number. Having proposed and circulated as it has been, the commission feels that that's one concession that we might be able to make, and some of us feel that this would provide the open door for other unions and would probably not require at some later date another change. But for the EUBs, it has great significance. Great significance.
In 1964, at the General Conference, I voted to have the new name, the United Methodist Church. And since that time, I've talked to a number of Evangelical United Brethren Church delegates here in Chicago, and they are insistent, nor are they greatly concerned. In some instances, they said they couldn't care less. This is what they tell me. The reason why I speak on behalf of the restoration of the Methodist Church is because that is what it will be. If we call it the United Methodist Church, it will be a misnomer. We do not have a United Methodist Church, and we won't have it until we have these other groups that would like to come back home with us in our midst as brothers and sisters in the Methodist Church. And then we will truly have a United Methodist Church.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Louie has already spoken in support of the motion to retain the name. I was looking for someone who is opposed to the restoration.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, are you ready to poll this matter?
parliamentary inquiry.
What is it?
As I understand the ruling of the chair and the explanation of Mr. Parlin, we are now actually voting on the Constitution. And we will not be able to reconsider these particular items except on normal reconsideration. Therefore, my inquiry is we are in the process of this moment of amending the Constitution of the Methodist Church. Does it not require a 2/3 vote?
No, sir. The 2/3 vote, as the chair understands it, is a 2/3 vote of the whole body over the whole instrument, the whole document.
Then will not this vote effectively permanently change the name of the Methodist Church?
It may.
It will.
Can I take a crack at this?
Well, Mr. Parlin, if crack is a parliamentary word,
Brother Cotton, I think we are not amending the Constitution of the Methodist Church. We are preparing a document which, on Friday morning, will move to be substituted for the Constitution of the Methodist Church. This is simply the perfection of the text of a document which will be the basis of a motion on Friday morning.
Well, Mr. Parlin, will we have the opportunity Friday morning to vote on the name under the rule of 2/3?
I would say not, sir. The 2/3 will apply to the instrument as a whole.
Then we will not be able to vote on this particular item.
I don't believe so, unless the House orders it. Now is the time to register your protest, sir. Well, just a minute. Let's see where we are. We've made a motion to restore the original name, the Methodist Church. Now I think it's the turn of someone who desires to speak against restoring the name.
Brother Bishop, with your patience, I want to ask a question upon this request.
Well now, make sure it is a parliamentary question.
Well, I will do my best. I would like to ask if there is some way for us to ascertain whether or not the EUBs would feel strongly about this issue. I think most of us would like to retain the name the Methodist Church, if it is possible, but would not want to make it an issue that stands in the way of union.
Well now, sir, if you're asking this of the chair, I would say this is one of the functions of the liaison committee to ascertain items of this kind.
Okay, I move, sir, to the liaison committee.
Well, it will go to them anyway, unless, well, especially if they protested from the other side.
Could I move to lay it on the table?
Well, you've got the right, you can try.
Brother Bishop, with respect, I would like to move this matter be laid on the table until the liaison committee can determine what the attitude of the EUB Church shall be.
All right. But the liaison committee is only charged to take action after we take an act. As I understand that it's different from the present document. Therefore, if we vote this change to retain the name, the Methodist Church, this is different from the document. It would go to the liaison committee, and if we defeat the motion to change the name and leave it as the United Methodist Church, it never gets discussed. So then, let's continue. We can't keep asking questions all the time.
All right. Then I would withdraw the motion which I made to lay it on the table, with the understanding that we are simply expressing a preference for one name or the other. And then after this is expressed, we will go through the liaison committee to the EUB Church for their expression.
That's what the liaison committee does. Mr. Cotton, to indicate the judgment of this house. Where are we? Is there anyone wishing to speak against the motion to retain the name, the Methodist Church?
Point of order.
Wait,
John said
Said-
it.
Mr. Satterfield.
You can stay there.
Oh, okay.
John Satterfield, Mississippi Conference. I wish to oppose the motion for the reason it seems to me that where we have these gentlemen, which we hope will come into our church, and where the chairman of this committee has stated that they have strong views about a name change, well then it's a material matter. It seems to me we should not object to our church being named the United Methodist Church. I can't agree with the position because there may be other Methodist churches. We are not the United Methodist Church. I hope the motion will be defeated.
The motion is to restore the name, the Methodist Church. Now, who else cares to speak?
I move the question.
Now, point of order.
Mr. Cotton.
As I understand the ruling of the chair to adopt the report of this committee will effectively change the name of the Methodist Church, and by so doing will change the constitution of the Methodist Church.
Well now, sir, sounds to me as though you're debating this. I thought this was a question.
Sir, I'm coming to the question. I respectfully disagree with the chair and understand the provision in our discipline. I haven't been able to put my finger on it, but it's there somewhere. Under the provision of our discipline, I hereby appeal for a ruling of the Judicial Council to determine whether under this parliamentary situation, whether the name of the Methodist Church can be changed by a majority vote, as the parliamentary situation now stands. I believe that as many as 1/5 of this body joins me in requesting such a ruling, it will be forthcoming. I so move for such a ruling and ask that the question be put on the right of 1/5 of this body to request a ruling on this particular point.
Well, I suppose the Judicial Council is not in Robert's Rule of Order, but if this House wants to make this the immediate matter, the chairman sees no reason why not to.
Point of clarification. All we're attempting to do here is perfect the document upon which we are to vote on later. And then we would be changing the Constitution if we adopt it affirmatively. We don't have to have a 2/3 vote to perfect a document.
Thank you. I'm afraid I would have to say over again what I tried to say before. We are not dealing with the Constitution of the Methodist Church. We're dealing purely with a document which we're trying to perfect. The test will be on Friday when we have a yes or no vote on the entire document being substituted for the Constitution of the Methodist Church. Then you will have to stand up and be counted, yes or no, 2/3 vote. But if this is simply perfecting a document to get before us the yes or no count, I make it clear that perfecting a document, you simply have to have a majority vote.
Point of order.
Wait a minute. The motion before us, which I have allowed, is a motion to refer this matter to the Judicial Council if the House desires.
Point of order.
All right. What is your point of order?
Mr. Chairman, according to Rule 20, the motion to order the previous question takes precedence over a motion to refer. And I believe the previous question on retaining the name was before us, and the motion to refer to the Judicial Council now seems to me to be out of order.
Now, sir, that's right. But I have ruled that if the House wants to take this act now, they can do it. That is the judgment of the chair. And I'm willing to be impeached on this matter. I have been before. But the matter the gentleman put in good faith, you can vote it down, sir, if you don't desire to do this. All right? The motion is that this matter be appealed to the Judicial Council and that we do not now act on it. As many as favor this appeal will lift the hand.
Question, please. Question.
Opposed? It's not appealed. All right? The motion now is to restore the original name, the Methodist Church.
I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead. All right, go ahead.
Just a question on the procedure, Mr. Bishop. If we follow the procedure we are now undertaking, doesn't this nullify any work, legislative work, coming up to legislative committee? Because what we do is assuming these positions, which will prejudge the positions that may come from the legislative committee. I'd like to ask a question whether or not this is not a case.
Point of order.
Just a moment. Just a minute. I hear you, and I will keep you in mind. Presumably, these are questions, and questions are in order, even though the previous question is ordered.
My question, Mr. Chairman, my question is, if we perfect this document here, and then 24 hours from now, the legislative committee presents a matter that is relevant to something we have already perfected, does this not already prejudge and therefore nullify work being done in the legislative committee?
Mr. Parlin, can you comment
I think it is quite the contrary. This is what we are doing, hearing the reports of the legislative committees. I am reporting for this ad hoc special committee, which was created yesterday, which is acting as a legislative committee on these items, which are not within the gamut of any of the standing committees. For example, as soon as I finish with my ad hoc group report, I take it the next report will be from the Committee of Conferences, and our debate on conferences will be triggered off by the Legislative Committee report, and so on right down the line. We are working under the framework of the legislative committees. Now, more to the point. The matter of the vote of the 1964 conference to retain the name of the Methodist Church was taken back to our joint commissions. And we wrestled with this long and hard and conscientiously. And they knew that the General Conference had expressed a preference for the name. Now, people say, I have talked to an EUB, and he told me this. I hate to think what some of us are telling the EUBs in the corridor. But we now they have 750,000 of them, and they are no more in agreement on subjects than we are. We have to trust the judgment of their 1819-man commission, which was set up to work on this matter. And after hours of patient, careful consideration of the problem, it was considered the judgment of the commissions that this name, the United Methodist Church, was an essential part of their success in getting an affirmative vote in their general conference and an affirmative vote from their annual conferences. They have been most gracious on practically every term. And in the end, they have conceded our Methodist form and our Methodist procedures. This is the one item which they have taken back, that they can take back to the constituencies as they make the rounds of the annual conferences, where they can say this is not an absorption by the bigger denomination of the smaller. They can say it is a union of churches made in good faith, and that we are recognized as a church, and that we are being recognized as coming into the union. The name is about the only concessions we are asked to make.
The motion now under the order for previous question, as many as favor restoring the present name, the Methodist Church. To this document, raise your hand. Those who are opposed? I believe it's lost. All right, next.
And there you have it, Mr. Davies. Surely you can understand why Luella and I had to take a break.
Wow. For a second there, I thought I stumbled into an episode of The Outer Limits. But the good news is that you have a name for your new church, the United Methodist Church.
It's true. And I, for one, am so glad that little item was finally settled, because really, Mr. Davies, this union is about so much more. Mr. Davies, you and your listeners may not be aware, but we EUBs proudly point to our origin in the barn of Isaac Long, where God's Spirit filled the souls and the new American church was launched.
Indeed, Luella. Truth be known, both of our church's beginnings were placed firmly in a barn-centered society. But that's not really true anymore.
That's right, Francis. That barn-centered society has faded. The days of horse and buggy are gone, and we live in a time of growing urban culture. I've no doubt that if my church doesn't move from the barn to the ballroom, we will cease to matter. So, at such a time as this, I feel that the lavish ballroom of the world's largest hotel is a very fitting place for the end of a church that began in a barn.
Oh, now, Luella, don't say an end. Surely you believe that this new union will inject new vigor and new life into the ministry of our new church?
That is my hope and prayer. Mr. Davies, I want your listeners to know that Francis and I look forward enthusiastically to union between our churches to join forces in the task of realizing God's mission in the world. Right, Francis?
Amen, Luella. Now, you and I should talk further on the best way to combine the resources of the women's group. First, let's consider...
Chicago, November 10th, 1966. You are there. The next day, the plan was to be approved by both general conferences. That morning in the Methodist ballroom, more than 60 Methodist bishops were seated on the platform. The bishops seemed relaxed, spent their time autographing each other's new Methodist hymnals. Each received special copies of this new editions. The Methodist stamp of approval was never really in doubt. The vote was taken at 11 a.m. on November 11th, the 48th anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I. The tally was over 90% in favor. Across the red carpeted hallway, the vote was not that certain. Tension had been building since the EUB delegates had returned from morning communion at the Chicago Temple. Shortly after noon, a moment of hush fell over the ballroom as an EUB vote came. Tellers counted. A 3/4 majority was needed. For the union would go forward, 310 of the 413 EUB delegates needed to vote in the affirmative. At last, the tally was announced. The aye votes numbered 325. The die was cast. Onward to union!